Hello and welcome back to Auto Archives. We are in a new apartment, but we are joined by a familiar cast of characters. There's the wonderful Gabriella Giacono behind the camera. There's a stack of car styling magazines beside me. There's a new plant and this old table. But now I'm on this porch. I'm outside. Thankfully, I have a porch now, so I can be in quarantine without a mask and speak to all of you. In Auto Archives, we go through these old issues of Car Styling magazine. It's an out-of-print Japanese periodical covering the inside industry of styling cars, and talk about some interesting concepts that never came to be, and see some images which are really hard to find on the internet. In this, we have a fascinating issue of the 1991 Detroit Auto Show, and everything in it is fantastic, except I just am going to highlight one car in particular. Alright, so it's great not just reading about these cars on Wikipedia, but also seeing them in a car magazine, because it talks about the auto show in general. In this we get a little description of how the show was a bit of a bummer, because it was taking place, I guess a week before Desert Storm. Yes, when the press week began, there was only a week left before the United Nations deadline to the Iraqis to pull out of Kuwait. It was the eve of Gulf War, and neither industry nor press members could return optimistic observation, writes the magazine. So, in this, if you can imagine the recession of the early 90s, the Japanese economic collapse, we are about in the timeline when Wile E. Coyote has run off of the cliff, but has not yet really looked down as to how bad it has been. So that means we still have a bunch of really interesting car concepts, but we also have a vague idea that none of these are ever going to be put into production, because pretty much all of these car companies are about to nearly go broke. And in it, we get, for instance, this GM hybrid concept of a minivan. Sad that GM has spent like 30 years and is still futzing around with EV and hybrid stuff. But we also get this, the Ford Contour, which is great because it highlights, one, Ford's amazing 1990s styling, where everything looks like a cyber jelly bean. And it also has the best wheels, which are these which don't go all the way around the wheel. They're just like some spokes on one corner. I'm into it. Would be into a revival of this. There's a CRT dash. There is a bench seat in the front, which is pretty outstanding, an all blue interior, which is, again, styling. But that's not why I want to talk about this car. I want to talk about it because of how it was built. Now, interestingly, it was made out of bonded aluminum, which is how Lotus makes its cars very light. But that's not what's interesting about it. And if you can see all the little bits and bobs, and little tiny parts in here, in this area, you can see that this is not a 4-cylinder engine, this is not a 6-cylinder engine, this is a Straight-8, which is pretty strange. Straight-8s were popular in the 1920s and 1930s when cars had gigantic hoods and everything looked like Cruella DeVille was driving it. And as cars became smaller and more modern, everything just, Straight-8s went away. You didn't need them. Why Ford gave this a shot in the 1990s, I guess, was that it was very easy to scale the engine up and down. Using the same parts, you could make a 4-cylinder, a 6-cylinder, or an 8-cylinder. In any case, this is what was called T-drive. So how did Ford get the Straight-8 to work? Well, they did an old trick which would have been found on, say, 1920s and 1930s Alfa Romeos. They took power out of the middle of the engine. This is also how Porsche did its flat 12s in the 1960s and 70s. Basically, you kind of had 4 cylinders on one side, 4 cylinders on the other, and a transmission which went out of the middle. Now, I could read all of the technical details because I did find the patent for it online, but I'm going to spare my editors and keep this nice and tidy, and it says that long story short, it was really difficult. It involved more specialty stuff than Ford thought it would, and that was kind of rough. Ford nearly had to suffer going into a recession anyway, so it wasn't about to spend a bunch of money on it anyway. So T-Drive never went into production. They did build some prototypes, including a straight-8 4-liter Ford Tempo, which is ridiculous. And the Ford Contour actually did become a production car. It was a jelly bean-looking car, as was the Ford Taurus of the 1990s, though not quite as fabulous as this one. This is all to say that in the late 80s and early 1990s, there was some absolutely fantastic and truly weird engine stuff going on. Now, there's lots of cool engine and tech development going on now as people experiment with hybrids and pneumatic valves and things, but the late 80s, early 90s was really outstanding, and this is really just one of them. There's a lot more that I could talk about all of this, including, where is it in here? Yes, this little guy, and this is actually the Ford Zigzag concept, Gia. This is a 2-stroke 3-cylinder. I will get into all the 2-stroke stuff maybe in another episode, in addition to a really fascinating Toyota from a few years before this, which is actually too much for me to even get into. Getting excited just thinking about it. As it is, I will cut it off here. The light is fading, the sun is setting. It's a beautiful day in Brooklyn, coming to an end. Yeah, stay tuned for the next episode. We'll be back here probably. And yeah, till then, ciao. The transmission including a hydrokinetic torque converter and a right angle